hegemon of the world. But this is now being threatened thanks to these two events, Ukraine and Gaza. And the breaking of the world into vertically into two, sides, with China and Russia on one side. And now much of the global south has realized that US's dollar have weaponized the dollar, and through sanctions, US is no more seen as a trustworthy, a global hegemon who would guarantee the public goods and safety of the world. So this is the reality. So you find that much of the continuity between various administrations is a deep state that does this part, and you will find most well-known economists like Michael Hudson or even journalists like Chris Hedges, they all say that the Trump is, I would say, more of histrionics, but the deep state controls everything. It doesn't really make much of a difference. And this extension of retaining, this overextension to retain their hegemony will continue to undo what the US is trying to retain. The only answer for that is to rationalize with the rest of the world and bring in and accept the reality of an emerging multipolar world, which means the economic system needs to change. So all the threats that Trump has been giving, for example, against the BRICS, threatening them that you de-dollarize, I'll come like a ton of bricks on you. Even if he tries to do, it may not be possible for him to do that. So with the $36 trillion of domestic debt, the dollar was 75% of the world's holdings in 2001. Today it's 59%. And it's declining quite rapidly. So what would be the future with respect to, over the next 3 years, will the histrionics continue, or will he change, or will the deep state change anything?
I think I mentioned it. Can Trump be stopped or at least slowed down really depends on, I think, how the domestic politics plays out. If, for example, he continues in the same manner, doing things without regard to his own party's people, right? And let's say, for example, the Republicans lose one or both chambers of Congress in the 2026 election, then pretty much Trump can be stopped in the last 2 years of his presidency. So that remains to be seen. So that is one check. Now, people are also saying all kinds of wild things. Trump will never leave and he will cancel elections. Those are all things that could potentially happen. And if things like that happen, then, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Right? And so then there could only be possibly widespread violence and so on and so forth. But between now and the 2-year mark when, that break can be applied on Trump, I just still feel that there's a lot that could potentially go wrong between now and then.
But he's a businessman essentially, and he's now having got, like you said, in the inaugural ceremony, all the oligarchs around them with Elon Musk and the others, including our Sundar Pichai. So have they taken virtually the control? You see Elon Musk literally running amok.
Yeah, Elon Musk has been given a free access. So, right, in Washington, the White House, and right next to that is called the Executive Office of the President. It's a big, huge building. Apparently, he has an entire office to himself there, and the two things are just connected by a very small passage. And I'm reading that Elon Musk is sleeping in his office and then walking into the White House as and when he wants. So, and, the other thing that has happened is, people like Elon Musk and some of his very young assistants have all been given high security clearances without a proper vetting. So I think as far as the other tech people are concerned, Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, Jeff Bezos and others, they don't want really any role in the American government. They just simply want to be left alone to make money. And, basically that's what Trump has done. He has, for example, the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces the antitrust monopoly, issues in the United States. The previous person in charge of the agency was a Pakistani-American woman called Lina Khan. and she has been fired. So they've put a very pro-business person in charge of that agency, which means all these guys will be free to buy and sell whatever they want with no questions asked. So that's what they want. But Elon Musk seems to definitely have a very different agenda. And I think at some point in the next few months, there's going to be a big clash between him and Trump. And hopefully we all pray that Musk gets kicked out of the White House.
Yeah, in fact, some of his first tenure advisors have vowed that we will get Elon Musk out in a short time. But notwithstanding that, there are a couple of things. One issue that on the economics that I want to raise. China seems to have prepared itself very well, looking for Trump's return. And therefore, what they've done, while they did not react as efficiently and as intelligently as they're doing now with, response in terms of tariffs, they have expanded their economic leverage in the rest of the world. So the exposure to the US in terms of percentage of their GDP is only 2.8%. So any of the tariff increases that he threatens could boomerang on the American economy and the American people themselves. That's one. And China has already captured the influence on the rest of the global south and rest of the world. So this is what probably you can see a little bit of downsizing in Trump's rhetoric over the last 3 weeks. Will that change even more?
I think as far as China is concerned, it's, I think, a ploy on the part of Trump to appear like a strong man in front of China and Russia. But if China were to even make a small indication that they are willing to work with him, he will just, drop all his pretense. Yeah. Because he really admires somebody like a Xi Jinping. Because in the past he has very admiringly said how Xi Jinping keeps a country of 1.5 billion people under his thumb. And he wants that same kind of control for himself. So and to your other point, China's prepared well. I think China is one of the countries that has an extremely long-term vision for how to execute a strategy. And unfortunately, I think the United States, the capacity to have a strategic thinking and planning in the long term is gone, is really eroded, whether it's in national security or domestic politics, because every 4 years brings this huge churn where thousands of officials leave the government and new people come and, everything is changed. So this is a problem. Yeah.
It's a good segue for me to ask you a question from two ladies. I thought I'd start questions from ladies first. There are very few of them in the room. Both of them pertain to China. With the increasing competition and the focus on China, will China still go ahead and, do what everybody fears they will do with reference to Taiwan? That's part one. The second lady asked, in that context, what will be the role of India in the Indo-Pacific? Will India become a closer partner to the United States as compared to what we are today?
Really interesting question. So, the biggest fear in Washington until a month ago, everybody is convinced that by 2027, Xi Jinping will somehow move and take Taiwan in some fashion. And so, the entire national security, foreign policy, military apparatus of the United States has been planning and thinking and working on that. Now, personally, I don't believe the United States will really put its blood and treasure to save Taiwan. I don't think so, because so they may try to. I think the United States strategy is to raise the cost for China by investing in weapons and ships and systems, so that China will think twice about taking Taiwan by force. But I don't believe that the United States will militarily intervene to physically stop, because one can imagine the actual cost in terms of the number of people dead and ships lost and so forth will be huge. And to the other point, if Trump says, okay, there's an old, thing in the United States history called the Monroe Doctrine, postulated by an American president, which says all the, countries and regions in the American continent, including North and South, should be under the, control of the United States. So basically now, Trump is reviving that mindset. Then there is really no sort of a place for the United States to oppose China from taking Taiwan in that case. So I think it actually makes it potentially more likely that China will attempt to do something in Taiwan once they assess, how weak or strong Trump is and how he is likely to react. And the second question was, what can India do? What will it do to the Indo-Pacific? The previous Biden administration created this grouping called the Quad, which is Japan, Australia, India, and I believe South Korea, right? US, yeah, sorry. Which I think that is still very much in place. And so potentially in a traditional American administration, that would be strengthened in the case of a conflict or a military activity in Taiwan. But generally speaking, Air Marshal can speak more to the Indian strategic thinking than I can. But India has always expressed, when I covered the US-India defense and national security affairs, India has never wanted to be, the Americans are always asking why India will not be a treaty partner. This is a constant question every newbie in a Washington foreign policy circles asks. But India has never wanted to be a treaty partner with anyone, because the old saying in Washington was, India will ride the bus with you for as long as it wants and then get off and do its own thing. So India actually always wants to keep a strategic flexibility and independence. So even though the Quad is sort of like a grouping, I don't think India will ever be driven into a treaty situation. So if, for example, China were to militarily take Taiwan, then I think India will really seriously reassess its own border conflicts and others with China.
If I just want to add that in the first analysis, I agree with you. In my analysis, China will not attack Taiwan. Why would they attack? Because Taiwan's biggest export partner, the maximum Taiwan exports to the country is China. That's one. Majority of the population have relations in mainland China. And they, despite all the other issues, they still have connections and they still work in business. That's one. Second, as long as Taiwan does not declare independence, the mainland China will not attack Taiwan. And it is probably, it's a power transition theory that the declining hegemon now wants to fight it out. It could only be the US who can create a situation where a conflict could come. Okay, but that would be dangerous for the US as we go along. In the Indo-Pacific, you're right. India will never be an alliance and treaty partner with anyone. Despite that, the US wants to pull India into that. It's tried its best. This is the question we constantly keep getting it, but it's not going to happen. And that's the reason US, UK, and Australia set up the AUKUS, which is nothing but a pure security defense alliance like the NATO against China. That's
it. Just to add to that, if on the one hand the United States is weakening all the global alliances, then the question is what about all these new alliances? Will they be strengthened? Will they be let to languish? So those are all questions still unanswered.
Well, again, when you discuss on this, yes, Trump is a maverick who's actually pretty much destroying all the alliances. But the NATO's even during Biden's time with the Ukraine war, they've almost made it as a handmaiden of the US, and Europe has been pretty much destroyed. So what you're actually seeing is where it suits them, they will talk about an alliance for that convenience. But US is behaving exactly as how the independent powers behaved in the League of Nations. And the League of Nations led to a world war. We are pretty much in the same situation. The US does not accept itself as subject to the International Court of Justice or the ICC. Trump has made a statement, I will sanction those judges who declared Netanyahu as a war criminal. The whole world agrees he was a war criminal. And so this is pushing towards finally saying, they walked out of WHO, they're walking out, and they walked out of the climate control. Finally are saying, okay, and dismantle the UN. This is probably a new world order will come, a new setup will come, but before all that, a lot of violence probably will happen.
Group Captain, there are a bunch of really good questions. I'm also conscious that we are... 15 minutes? Okay, 7:30. So I think the next question is for you, Air Marshal. With Trump offering advanced fighter jets, I'm not very sure if he's actually offering, but this is something that has been up in the air. And emphasizing on defense, how should India navigate its strategies on defense partnership with both the United States and other nations like Russia while safeguarding the strategic autonomy?
Very interesting. And he's made that statement, a general statement, that we are going to sell billions of dollars of military equipment to India, including F-35. Now, he's not quantified as to when, what, and how firm is the F-35 on offer. So it's a very ambiguous statement, one. But the US wants to pull us away from Russian access to Russian weapons. They've been trying this, they are trying this continuously since 15 years, 20 years now. The reason is that's one of the ways in which they can lock us, even if you're not a treaty partner, into an alliance like the Quad, and then coerce you because they will increase your dependency. So this is the larger purpose. Between 2007 and now, we've already given the US military industrial complex a business of about $24 billion. That's the highest we've given in this time frame, shorter time frame. All right, and all of them are off-the-shelf buys. Okay, fine, we bought C-17 good aircraft, C-130 helicopters, we bought the ships, we bought the Boeing P-8Is. So all that cannot be manufactured here, that is okay. But now when it comes to fighters, it's a very tricky game. So if F-35 is being offered, they've already mentioned the conditionalities. We would want to know in which base each aircraft is located, who's flying it, where it will fly. That means you've lost your sovereignty. The US will have complete strategic knowledge of how you're operating your system. No country is going to accept that. Maybe because Japan and Germany are defeated parties and tied down by an alliance, they have to live that way. They don't know, they don't have an option. But India doesn't have to. And second, India has always made a very delicate balancing act since independence, in not even wanting to depend excessively on the Russians. We've reduced the dependency on Russian systems from almost 70-80%. Today it's about 41%. So we've diversified to European countries, to Central European countries, to the US, but we don't want to get locked into the US. But suppose, let's say, the US says, okay, fine, we want to have a very strong strategic partnership. We'll open out the technology domain to you. We will set up the complete manufacturing of F-35 in India. Maybe that could change some mindsets. But still, you have to remember Kissinger's words. It's bad to be USA's enemy, but it is very fatal to be USA's friend. Okay, so that's what you need to remember.
I think both of you are competing to depress everybody here in this room. So, Gopal, this is for you. It's on bilateral trade from two members of the audience. One is, there is a promise of this $500 billion bilateral trade by 2030, I think. What are the key sectors that India should focus on? That's item number one. And the second question that has come is, Trump has spoken about exporting oil and gas to India. And on the other hand, we also speak about greening of the energy supply chain. Will, in fact, US help India in that energy transition? And when you're addressing this, maybe would you like to touch on what happens to the tech trade with the United States? I think they have taken a 6-month time for figuring out what they want to do with AI or something of that sort. Yeah.
So maybe I can talk about that AI thing first. So when ChatGPT came on the scene, there was an utter panic in Washington. And so then the Biden administration and members of Congress held a series of discussions with all the tech people. trying to understand what the ramifications are, what the dangers are, what the opportunities are. Now, in typical American fashion, they did not want to, pass any regulations, but waited to see how things will emerge. In the meantime, as many of you know, the European Union has passed what is called the EU AI Act, which has very strict controls on what areas the AI systems can be used, ranking them according to their risk. But Biden people on their own basically issued a set of guidelines, and there is a institution in the United States called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They created something called the AI Safety Institute, primarily to have models like ChatGPT and others voluntarily tested, to see if these are capable of, for example, helping some terror group or somebody create chemical weapons and biological weapons and so on. So when Trump came, he basically removed and canceled all of those efforts. Now he has put a venture capitalist in charge of the AI policy, and now they are saying it will take 6 months for them to come up with a new AI policy, which they are saying will be free and will not shackle industry and so on. But as anyone who works in technology knows, AI companies are not going to stop for the 6 months until this policy is issued. So they are now in a place where the previous controls and regulations are not in place, the new ones are not in place, so they are in a free-for-all situation. And I know that a lot of American companies that have bases in the US and internationally are worried about how to comply with EU law and then what will happen in the American situation. That's sort of a lot of uncertainty about what will happen. In terms of the trade areas, I think one of the things that I've really not seen a lot done, but India being a huge, has a fairly significant, robust pharmaceutical sector, there is a lot of consternation and fear in the United States that pharma and bio products or components of pharma and bio products that come from China could be tainted or dangerous. In fact, there is an effort in the US Congress to actually pass laws. There's a particular law called Biosecure Act, which will ban the importation of some of these ingredients into the United States. So there may be actually a big opportunity for Indian companies in pharma and broadly the biotechnology sector, which is also now called synthetic biology. So maybe there might be actually big opportunities there, because that's actually attracting a lot of investment, maybe not on the same scale as AI, but significant investments as well. What is the other question? You had one more?
The green energy.
See, green energy, now if Trump is opposed to all forms of green energy and he wants to go back to drilling oil and shale gas and all of that, so it's a question of what do we do? There is legislation which is probably pumping $700-800 billion into greening of America's energy systems. But, the Republicans in Congress and Trump are trying their very best to stop all of these programs. So if all of these are halted halfway through, then I don't know how, the U.S. can provide technological help to other countries to actually do the greening of their energy system.
In fact, I'm sure you'll agree with me, if the American economy today can be said to depend on just 4 sectors: the military-industrial complex, oil and gas, big tech, and pharma. Right? Now, if he is going to now undo all the green issues, if the American Constitution is strong, the democracy is pretty strong, so I don't think he'll be able to overturn any of that process. That is one of the vibrant strengths of the American economy. So people probably will wait out for him to finish and move, and the green things will come back again. And I think it makes sense for India to remain on track with respect to, as a country that's dependent on fossil fuel, it makes sense for us to remain on track to get away from the fossil fuel dependence, right? So we don't have to import just because Trump wants us to import fossil fuel.
Marshall, there are a couple of very specific questions. One is Rana's extradition. What more can we do to achieve that? And is there anything else that we can do to cooperate better with the United States and counter terrorism?
It's taken so many years. I was the Air Force commander in Bombay on that night. And so we've seen what happened. And this guy should have been extradited at least a decade ago. But notwithstanding that, I heard the news this morning, and I think this is one of the best decisions Trump has given. Let this guy come, let's deal with it. It sets a precedent. It sets a precedent. That's actually the most important outcome. Not that it will solve everything immediately, but it sets a precedent, and so that subsequent presidents who follow Trump cannot, deny, if somebody is working against Indian interest. And I think Prime Minister has already made the statement about Khalistan, and probably they will have to listen on some of these areas.
Great. You must have seen me putting down these sheets of paper. It's simply because, the questions are really relevant, but they have been covered in some shape or form by the two experts, so I just didn't want to, go back, in a sort of a numerical manner. I think we have two last questions, both for Gopal. One, Biden claims he has left behind a very strong United States economy, and Trump says, what is it called? Lazy Biden or something like that? Sleepy Biden. Sleepy Biden, Sleepy Joe. So, which one is true? I mean, has he left behind a strong economy or has he left behind a lot of muck?
Well, as a basic starting point, one should say that anything Trump says is complete BS. He has made a complete life and professional career out of just lying. It is true that actually Trump, if I think in 20 years history were written, Biden will probably be one of the most consequential presidents. Because in terms of policies that address the needs of Americans, Biden probably did a lot more than any president in recent memory. Overall, he helped pass like 3 significant pieces of legislation that put nearly, I think, $4 trillion into the American economy. One was the greening initiative. One was the infrastructure initiative. And Trump, in the first term, kept talking about an infrastructure plan every week, but he did not do a single thing on infrastructure. And Biden actually got that done in the first 2 years. So the biggest problem with the Democrats, and my wife is here, so we've actually been talking to a few Democratic candidates. The biggest problem for Democrats is they do a lot of very good policies, but they are terrible in actually telling the story of what they are doing. And in fact, Biden himself on his way out said that he spent too much time on policies and not enough time on politics. Like, for example, a key thing. In the first term, Trump, when COVID hit and all Americans got a check from the president as an incentive during the COVID shutdown, Trump signed every one of those checks himself. Although normally the US Treasury, some secretary will sign it and send it, Trump insisted he sign it. So a lot of Americans actually took selfies with the check saying, hey, Donald Trump sent me a check. When Biden came, he also issued incentive checks, but, somebody who didn't pay attention to the politics of it, he just let some officials sign it and sent it, and you got no benefit of actually having sent money to people. So, in terms of actual policies, I think Biden accomplished a lot, but never managed to actually tell a story of what they achieved. And of course, if you leave, it's like in football, you leave the goal unattended, somebody is going to just kick the ball in. So that's what Trump is doing.
The last question, yes or no question, will Trump make America great again?
Oh, man.
This is serious. This is actually written down on this piece of paper. So,
no, it all depends, I think, on what great means. And I think I alluded to some of this. His idea and his people's idea of greatness is a country of entirely white people, somewhere in the 1800s, conquering frontier towns and chasing Native Americans out of their land and so on. And so that's kind of like the mythical idea he's alluding to, but I don't think that's ever going to come to fruition.
Never, absolutely. But you could comment what will be the shape of foreign policy that the administration will take. That's one. And second is Trump really in charge, or the deep state continues to be in charge?
I think, the nomenclature deep state itself is a fairly sort of an offensive thing because I don't think there's a real deep state. Yes, are there intelligence agencies, spy agencies that have secrets? Yes, it's there in every major country. They do keep secrets that not everybody knows, but because that's how complex societies work. But to take every bureaucrat in the office and every FBI agent and every prosecutor and call him or her a deep state agent, it's just, I think, terrible. But now we are going to see they are trying to kick out some 5,000 FBI agents, remove all attorneys. And actually for me, one of the biggest things, if I were a betting man, I would be very, very worried that in about 2 to 3 years, the United States may actually suffer a pretty catastrophic attack. Because they are weakening so much of the intelligence apparatus and law enforcement apparatus, and there are a lot of domestic terrorists in the United States. People forget it's not just somebody coming from somewhere and blowing things up. America has a history of domestic terrorism. People forget there's somebody called Timothy McVeigh who blew up a government building because people told him government was evil. So all of those things are actually very troubling to just be called deep state and remove all of them from power.
It's very tempting to keep going on. It's a fascinating discussion, but group captain has already stood up, which is a cue for us to wind down things. It's been a fascinating discussion. I only wish it was a little more positive. A big round of applause. Air Marshal, thank you very much. And let me hand it back to you, group.